In 1948, Union Pacific faced a crisis no ordinary locomotive could solve. Sherman Hill, 7 miles of Wyoming granite, was crushing their freight operation. Even the mighty big boys burned through $500,000 a year just to crawl over the grade. Diesel lash-ups. They stalled halfway up, blocking the main line for hours. The board demanded something radical, a single locomotive with the power of 5 diesels. What they got was a machine so loud it rattled windows 3 miles away, so powerful it could snap steel couplers in half, so revolutionary it crushed every freight record in American railroad history. But if this turbine was truly the future, why did it vanish almost overnight? To understand that, you have to see just how desperate things became before anyone dared to build the world's loudest train. Before we dive into this engineering beast, if you love stories about machines that changed history, hit that subscribe button. We're uncovering forgotten innovations every week. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Sherman Hill wasn't just steep, it was strategically brutal. Between Cheyenne and Beaufort, the westbound grade climbed at 1.85%, a number that sounds innocent until you're the one trying to haul 5,000 tons of freight up its spine. This wasn't some gentle mountain pass. This was the single steepest sustained grade on Union Pacific's entire transcontinental main line. Frank Morrison had worked as night dispatcher in Cheyenne for 12 years. He'd seen everything: locomotives with burst boilers, trains that rolled backward down the grade when couplers failed, crews that worked triple shifts because the railroad couldn't find enough men willing to fight the hill. On a winter night in February 1948, he sat in his cramped office watching the clock tick past 2 a.m. Somewhere up that grade, 3 helper engines were trying to push a westbound freight over the summit. 45 minutes. That's how long they'd been at it. The radio crackled. The engineer's voice came through hoarse, barely audible over the thunder of 6 steam locomotives working in concert. "We're crawling, maybe 8 miles per hour. Coal pressure's dropping on number 2. Morrison made a note in the logbook. This was the 3rd stalled train that week. Behind this one, 4 more freights waited in the yard, their crews drinking burnt coffee, checking their watches, calculating lost hours and missed sleep. The war had been over for 3 years, but Sherman Hill's war was just beginning. Charlie Brennan, a veteran engineer who'd worked this grade since before Pearl Harbor, described it with brutal honesty. "The hill doesn't care how much coal you burn or how many men you throw at it. It just sits there, granite and gravity, waiting for you to run out of steam." The post-war boom hit in 1947 like a freight train with no brakes. Factories that built tanks now churned out refrigerators. Steel mills that armored battleships now fed construction sites, and every manufactured good, every ton of coal, every barrel of oil moved by rail. In a single year, Union Pacific's freight volume surged 50%. The yards couldn't handle it. Cheyenne Terminal, which normally saw 40 cars waiting for westbound slots, now had 120 sitting idle. The big boy steam locomotives, Union Pacific's 600-ton answer to heavy freight, could muscle over Sherman Hill, but at what cost? The accounting department ran the numbers: over $500,000 per year per locomotive. Mountains of coal, endless maintenance, crews working around the clock just to keep the giants running, and even then, they couldn't keep up with demand. Diesel power had arrived with promises. EMD's F-Series diesels were modern, clean, efficient. But on Sherman Hill, those promises turned to smoke. A single F3 diesel made 1/500 horsepower. To move a heavy westbound freight, Union Pacific had to lash together 4, 5, sometimes 6 units. 6 engines to fuel, 6 sets of mechanics, 6 points of failure. When one unit stalled, and they did constantly, the whole consist could die halfway up the climb. Thomas Mackenzie, yard supervisor, kept a handwritten tally. Delays, missed schedules, trains blocking the main line while crews scrambled for helpers. "We're running at capacity," he told his morning briefing, "and capacity isn't enough." The squeeze was real. The railroad needed more power, but more steam meant more cost. More diesels meant more complexity. Something had to break. The executive conference room on the 12th floor of Union Pacific's Omaha headquarters had tall windows overlooking the Missouri River. On this June morning in 1948, nobody was looking at the view. William Jeffers stood at the head of the mahogany table, sleeves rolled up, jaw set. Jeffers was a railroader's railroader, started as a track laborer, climbed every rung. He had no patience for excuses. "Gentlemen," he said, tapping a thick folder of operational reports, "we are hemorrhaging money on Sherman Hill. Steam is dying, diesel consists are failing, we are bottlenecked, and every day we delay costs as freight, we'll never recover." Around the table sat the senior leadership: Chief Mechanical Officer, Head of Operations, Comptroller, Regional Superintendents. They'd all seen the numbers. Arthur Stoddard, Chief Mechanical Officer, spoke carefully. "We've looked at bigger diesels, sir. EMD promises 2,000 horsepower units by next year, but even then we'd need 3 or 4 per train. The math doesn't fundamentally change." Jeffers leaned forward. "Then we stop thinking incrementally. We stop patching together fleets of weak engines." He paused, letting the silence build. "I want one locomotive, one machine with the power of 5 diesels, something that can take 100-car freight over Sherman Hill without helpers, without delays, without excuses." Someone at the table actually laughed, not mockingly, nervously, because what Jeffers was asking for didn't exist. The most powerful diesel in production made 2,000 horsepower. 5 of them meant 10,000 horsepower in a single unit. No manufacturer in the world could deliver that. "Find a way," Jeffers said, "or find new careers." Meeting minutes from that day, preserved in Union Pacific's archives, captured the urgency in clinical language. Board directive: pursue unconventional propulsion technologies capable of delivering 8,000-plus horsepower in single-unit configuration. What they needed, one executive put it, was a battleship on rails, not a flotilla of rowboats. The financial gap was impossible to ignore. Steam drained the budget. Diesel lash-ups weren't much better. The real breakthrough would come from something nobody in that room had seriously considered. Something radical, something dangerous, something from the sky. Real quick, if you're enjoying this deep dive into railroad history, make sure you're subscribed. We're telling stories about engineering that pushed boundaries and machines that changed the world. Hit that button so you don't miss the next one. Vincent Mertz stared at a jet engine and saw more than flight. He saw the answer to a railroad's nightmare. Mertz was a General Electric engineer stationed at the company's Schenectady Works in upstate New York. While the rest of the railroad industry dismissed turbines as impractical fantasy, Mertz and his small team were asking a different question. If a turbine could hurl a fighter jet through the sky at 600 miles per hour, why couldn't it haul a freight train over the Rockies? Aviation had already proven the concept. In the skies over Korea, the F-86 Sabre and MiG-15 were rewriting the rules of aerial combat. Their secret: gas turbines. The cycle was beautifully simple. Air rushed into a compressor, got squeezed tight, mixed with fuel, then ignited in a controlled explosion. The force spun a turbine wheel at speeds up to 60 or 900 RPM, so fast that engineers had to invent new nickel alloys just to keep the blades from disintegrating. The exhaust screamed out at 800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to blister paint and warp steel 50 feet away. But the real magic wasn't the heat or the speed. It was the simplicity. A turbine had a fraction of the moving parts of a diesel engine, no pistons slamming back and forth, no crankshafts twisting under stress, just pure continuous rotation delivering smooth, relentless power. Mertz's notes from 1947, still preserved in GE's archives, put it bluntly. Aviation power adapted for rails, showing 10x horsepower per pound of any current locomotive. The challenge was translation. Aircraft turbines were designed for high-altitude flight at 30,000 feet, not for crawling up a mountain with a mile-long train. Turbines thrived on steady, high loads. They hated to idle or throttle back. But the numbers? Impossible to ignore. A single gas turbine could deliver 8,500 horsepower, more than 5 times what a standard diesel could muster. Skeptics pointed to every reason it should fail. Turbines spun so fast that any flaw could lead to catastrophic failure. Blades turning into shrapnel at supersonic speeds. The exhaust was so hot it could scorch tunnel linings. And the sound. Engineers joked it was like standing behind a jet at takeoff. Only louder. But Mertz was undeterred. With the right engineering, he believed the turbine's brute force could be tamed for the rails. GE's Schenectady test beds became a proving ground. Engineers ran turbines at full throttle, measuring vibrations, testing alloys, calculating how much air and fuel could be crammed through the system before something gave way. They designed massive intake screens to protect against birds and debris, because at 6,900 RPM, even a sparrow could destroy the compressor. They built heavy-duty generators to convert spinning energy into electricity for traction motors. Every test pushed limits, but each success brought the concept closer to reality. Union Pacific's leadership watched with growing interest. The old solutions, lash-ups of diesels, armies of steam crews, were running out of road. The turbine offered a clean slate. It was a gamble. But the stakes were clear. Solve Sherman Hill, and the railroad could move more freight, faster, at lower cost. Mertz's vision, born in the jet age, was about to meet Wyoming granite head-on. The leap from sky to rail was no longer fantasy. It was a blueprint ready to be built. In 1958, Union Pacific took delivery of a machine that looked less like a locomotive and more like a rolling industrial experiment. The railroad called it the Big Blow. It was built in 3 distinct units stretching nearly 200 feet from nose to tail. Up front sat the cab, a fortress of steel and glass where the crew rode high above the rails. Behind it sat the turbine car, a massive steel box housing the beast's heart, a gas turbine engine, spinning at 6,900 revolutions per minute. At the very end rolled a fuel tender that resembled a small oil tanker on wheels, its walls lined with heating coils and insulation. Union Pacific's procurement team had demanded one thing: power delivered without compromise. General Electric answered with a turbine that could produce 8,500 horsepower. For context, 5 EMD F7 diesels working together produced 7,500 odd horsepower. This single machine matched them all, and then exceeded them. But raw power was only part of the equation. The real innovation sat in that fuel tender. Traditional locomotives burned diesel fuel, which cost roughly 15 cents per gallon in 1958. The Big Blow burned something else entirely: Bunker C fuel oil. Also called number 6 fuel oil, Bunker C was refinery waste, the thick, black, viscous sludge left over after everything useful had been extracted from crude oil. It was so dense it barely flowed at room temperature. Refineries practically gave it away. At 3 cents per gallon, Bunker C cost 1/5 what diesel did. The fuel tender was an engineering marvel in its own right. Inside, heating coils kept the Bunker C at 200 degrees Fahrenheit so it would flow through the lines. Pumps pressurized it, then atomized it into a fine mist before injection into the combustion chamber, where it ignited in a roar of blue flame. This was an economic hack on an industrial scale. The Big Blow could run for hundreds of miles between refueling stops, burning fuel nobody else wanted. The tender held 24,000 gallons, meaning fewer stops and more time hauling freight. Every detail was engineered for endurance. The turbine itself had only a handful of moving parts compared to thousands inside a diesel. Fewer parts meant fewer breakdowns and less maintenance time. Inside the cab, engineers faced a control panel unlike anything they'd seen. Instead of throttling up a diesel, they managed a jet engine, monitoring temperatures, fuel flow, turbine speed. The startup sequence was a ritual: prime the lines, heat the fuel, bring the turbine to idle, then unleash 8,500 horsepower with a twist of the throttle. The payoff was immediate. A single Big Blow could move 100 loaded boxcars up Sherman Hill at speeds that left traditional engines gasping. Union Pacific's gamble was driven by cold arithmetic. Every mile the Big Blow ran on cheap fuel saved money. Every train it pulled without helpers or multiple diesels cut labor and maintenance costs. By 1958, they had a machine that could do the work of 5 diesels at a fraction of the fuel price. The Big Blow wasn't just a new locomotive, it was a statement of intent. For a brief, glorious moment, Union Pacific had turned the railroad's biggest headache into a showcase of American engineering audacity. If you're fascinated by these engineering stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We've got more incredible machines and forgotten innovations coming your way. Let's keep digging into history together. The first time a Big Blow left the Cheyenne yard at full throttle, every head within 3 miles turned. The sound alone was enough to rattle windows and set dogs barking. For the crews at the controls, it was something else entirely. Engineer Bill Price described the turbine's scream as like 10 747s spooling up at once, a vibration so strong it made the cab shake and my teeth buzz. Fireman Ray Delicotte joked that the air intake could have sucked the hat right off his head if he got too close. But when the throttle opened and the train started to move, all anyone could do was hang on. Sherman Hill, where steam giants had crawled and diesels stalled, the Big Blow took the grade like it was nothing. 1 engine, 3 units long, pulling 100 loaded boxcars up a 1.55% grade at 40 miles per hour. The numbers were staggering. Each turbine averaged more than 100,000 miles every year, running almost non-stop from Council Bluffs to Ogden and back. Even though they made up less than 2% of Union Pacific's locomotive fleet, these machines hauled more than 10% of all the railroad's freight. That's not a typo. 1 out of every 10 tons crossing the Rockies rode behind a turbine. The power was so overwhelming it sometimes outmatched the hardware it was supposed to protect. There's a story from 1960 that became legend among Union Pacific crews. A Big Blow loaded with 100 cars started up Sherman Hill a little too aggressively. The engineer, new to turbine operations, opened the throttle too fast. The locomotive surged forward with such force that the coupler on the first car snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. The rest of the train, 99 loaded cars weighing thousands of tons, started rolling backward down the grade. It wasn't a fluke. If the engineer got careless with the throttle, the turbine could literally snap steel couplers in half. The rules had to be rewritten for this kind of force. Crews learned to ease into power, respecting the machine's brutal strength. Dispatcher logs from the late 1950s and early 1960s tell the story in cold numbers. Average climb time for a 100-car freight on Sherman Hill. Big Boy steam, 52 minutes. 6-unit diesel consist, 48 minutes. Single Big Blow turbine, 31 minutes. The turbine didn't just beat the competition, it crushed it. Crews described the experience as both terrifying and addictive. The cab vibrated non-stop, a bone-deep rumble that you felt in your sternum. The heat from the turbine exhaust could blister paint 50 feet away. And the noise was so intense that men wore double ear protection just to get through a shift. But when the train crested the summit at speed with no helpers and no delays, it felt like victory. Engineer Thomas Bradley, who ran turbines from 1959 to 1967, put it simply, "You either loved them or hated them. There was no in-between. I loved them. That machine made me feel like I was driving the future." For nearly 2 decades, the Big Blow didn't just meet the challenge of Sherman Hill, it obliterated it. The critics who had called it a monster had to admit, the monster could move mountains. The reign of the Big Blow was always balanced on a razor's edge. For all its brute force and record-breaking performance, the turbine had a weakness that no amount of engineering could hide. Fuel efficiency at anything less than full throttle was catastrophic. Unlike a diesel, which could idle quietly and sip fuel, the turbine guzzled bunker C at nearly the same rate standing still as when hauling 100 cars up Sherman Hill. The physics were unforgiving. A gas turbine operates most efficiently under constant high load. When you throttle back or let it idle, the fuel-to-power ratio collapses. Crews dreaded long waits at red signals or sidings. Every wasted minute meant gallons of fuel burned and dollars evaporating into the Wyoming wind. Ray Delicotte, who worked as fireman on turbine runs from 1960 to 1965, remembered the anxiety. You'd be sitting at a siding, waiting for an eastbound to pass, and you could literally watch the fuel gauge drop. 10 minutes, 20 gallons gone for nothing. Union Pacific's accountants watched the fuel bills climb with growing alarm. When the first turbines rolled out in 1958, Bunker C was refinery trash, thick, black, nearly worthless. At 3 cents a gallon, it was the loophole that made the entire experiment economically viable. But by the mid-1960s, the world changed. Chemists found ways to crack heavy fuel oil into plastics. What had been waste became feedstock for an entirely new industry: toys, car parts, packaging, synthetic fabrics. Suddenly, the stuff nobody wanted became valuable. The price of Bunker C didn't just creep up, it soared. By 1969, Bunker C cost almost as much as diesel fuel, erasing the one advantage that had kept the turbines profitable. Internal memos from Union Pacific's executive offices preserved in the railroad's archives spelled out the hard truth. A memo dated March 1967 from the Comptroller's office to the Board of Directors reads, "Turbine fuel costs have doubled in 18 months. Current projections indicate Bunker C will reach price parity with diesel by 1970. Combined with maintenance overhead and operational limitations, turbine operations now cost 1.8x per mile versus modern diesel consists." The break-even point had vanished. Railroad President John Kennefick put it bluntly in a 1968 board meeting. "Keep the turbines running and we bleed cash. Retire them and we lose operational capacity. Neither option is acceptable." But economics weren't the only pressure building against the turbines. The turbine scream, once a badge of power, became a political liability. In the late 1940s, when the first prototypes ran, most of Union Pacific's route through Wyoming passed through empty high desert. Towns were small, isolated, spaced miles apart. The turbine's roar was dramatic but largely unnoticed except by railroad workers. By the mid-1960s, America had changed. Suburbs sprawled along the tracks. Towns like Rawlins and Laramie grew as the post-war population boom pushed westward. Suddenly, the tracks that once cut through wilderness now ran past neighborhoods, schools, shopping centers. And the turbines, they were impossible to ignore. Resident complaints flooded city councils across Wyoming. Janet Morrison, a housewife in Rawlins, testified at a 1966 council meeting. "That train shakes my windows at 2 a.m. My children wake up crying. Our dishes rattle in the cupboards. You can hear it 3 miles away. Another resident described it as like living next to an airport runway, except the plane never takes off. It just sits there screaming. There were no formal bans written into law. The federal government regulated railroad operations, and local municipalities had limited power to restrict them. But the message was clear: keep the monsters away from populated areas or face a political fight. Union Pacific quietly began routing turbines away from residential zones when possible, parking them in remote sidings between runs. But that operational constraint only made their inefficiency worse. More idling meant more wasted fuel. Public relations became a nightmare. Newspaper articles in Wyoming and Utah portrayed the turbines as mechanical menaces. Editorial cartoons showed locomotives with fangs, breathing fire over cowering families. The railroad's public affairs office tried damage control, publishing pamphlets explaining the economic benefits, emphasizing freight capacity and job creation. But you can't spin away a sound that rattles windows at midnight. Engineer Bill Price remembered the shift in atmosphere. In '58, people would line up trackside to watch us go by. Kids would wave. By '68, we got middle fingers and angry phone calls to the dispatcher. The magic was gone. We're digging deep into engineering. History here, machines that pushed boundaries and changed industries. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. There's more forgotten innovation coming your way, and you won't want to miss it. By 1970, the verdict was inescapable. The turbines were withdrawn from regular service, their hulking frames parked in dead lines at remote sidings. Most were cut up for scrap by 1979, their engines silenced before the first oil crisis could rewrite the rules. The final operational turbine ran its last revenue trip on December 26, 1969, a westbound freight from Cheyenne to Ogden. Engineer Thomas Bradley was at the controls. He'd requested the assignment specifically, knowing it would be the last time. "We crested Sherman Hill at sunset," Bradley recalled years later. The turbine was singing, that high-pitched scream you could feel in your bones. I throttled back at the summit and just sat there for a minute, listening to it wind down. I knew I'd never hear that sound again. The reasons for retirement were coldly practical: economics. Bunker C fuel costs had eliminated the financial advantage. Modern diesel-electric locomotives, particularly EMD's new SD40 and SD45 models, delivered 3,600 horsepower per unit with far better fuel efficiency. 2 SD45s cost less to operate than one turbine. Maintenance? While turbines had fewer moving parts, the parts they did have required specialized knowledge and equipment. Union Pacific had invested heavily in diesel maintenance infrastructure. Keeping a separate supply chain and training program for turbines no longer made economic sense. Operational flexibility. Diesels could be added or removed from consists easily, allowing precise matching of power to load. Turbines were all-or-nothing machines, 8,500 horsepower, whether you needed it or not. Public relations. The noise complaints, while not legally binding, created political headaches that railroad executives no longer wanted to fight. Union Pacific's board made the decision in March 1969. By year's end, all turbines were out of revenue service. A few were preserved. Number 18, one of the original 1958 units, sits today at the Illinois Railway Museum. Number 26 is displayed at the Ogden Union Station Museum in Utah, its turbine long since removed, its fuel tender drained. But most were simply destroyed, cut apart for scrap metal, their turbines sold to industrial power plants, their memories fading into railroad folklore. What do we learn from the big blow? First, raw power alone doesn't guarantee success. The turbines had more horsepower than anything else on rails, but that advantage couldn't overcome economic reality. When fuel prices changed, the entire business case collapsed. Second, external factors matter. The turbines were designed in an era when Bunker C was worthless and suburbs didn't sprawl along railroad tracks. Both assumptions proved temporary. Great engineering can't survive if the world changes beneath it. Third, specialization has costs. The turbines required unique infrastructure, fuel handling, maintenance expertise, operational procedures. That specialization created vulnerability. When Union Pacific decided to standardize on diesel-electric power, the turbines became orphans. But there's a deeper lesson here, one that transcends railroads. Innovation doesn't always move in straight lines. Sometimes the future arrives too early. Sometimes a revolutionary idea needs the right economic moment to survive. The big blow turbines were ahead of their time in some ways, jet-age technology applied to industrial freight. But they were also products of their specific moment: cheap, heavy fuel oil, low environmental standards, sparse population along rail corridors. When that moment passed, so did they. Yet their legacy persists. Union Pacific's willingness to gamble on radical technology set a precedent. Modern locomotives use computer controls, AC traction motors, and regenerative braking, innovations that seemed equally radical when first introduced. The railroad that dared to build jet engines on rails kept pushing boundaries. Today, railroads chase efficiency and silence. Modern freight locomotives are marvels of optimization. Fuel consumption measured to the gallon, noise emissions regulated by federal law, operations managed by satellite GPS, and computerized dispatch systems. But the need for raw, disruptive power never truly disappears. As global shipping demands surge and energy sources shift, the question returns: will we dare to build machines that challenge limits, even when they don't fit polite expectations? Hydrogen fuel cells, battery electric locomotives, even new turbine designs using liquefied natural gas. Engineers are exploring them all. Some will succeed, most will fail. But the spirit that built the big blow, the willingness to gamble on radical solutions to impossible problems, that spirit endures. Progress is not always quiet. Sometimes it shakes the ground. The big blow turbines were loud, inefficient, and ultimately doomed. But for 20 years they were also the most powerful locomotives on Earth. They solved a problem everyone said was unsolvable. They hauled millions of tons of freight over a mountain that had broken lesser machines. They roared across Wyoming like thunder made metal, and for one brief, glorious moment, they proved that sometimes the impossible is just engineering waiting to happen. So what do you think? Could a new turbine ever roar again? Will future railroads dare to push boundaries like Union Pacific did in 1958? Let me know in the comments. And if you love this deep dive into forgotten engineering, if you want more stories about machines that changed the world and then vanished, subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who loves trains, history, or just incredible stories of human ambition, because there are more untold tales waiting, and I can't wait to share them with you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.